Greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adams van Sail, here to shine a light on the goings-on here down south and at the southern tip of Africa, and this time for a little bit of a retrospective conversation before we head to the future. And my guest here joining me for that conversation that I'm very much looking forward to is a familiar face on the channel, Russell Lamberti, and I don't think he even needs an introduction, but he is the head economist at Sakeliga. And we're going to be talking about what has been going on in the last decade in regards to between about 2015 to now as we head into 2025. I think this has been a time where a lot of personal growth has happened, a lot of people's core ideas have been shaken. And Russell, I'm glad you're here to join me for this conversation. I think there's a lot to unpack. We'll try to keep it nice and compact. I mean, this topic alone can fill many hours of conversation, already has filled many hours of private conversation. But let's see where it goes. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. It's wonderful to be here again. And if we have a relaxed conversation and just touch on a couple of themes that might help people to just get the thinking juices flowing and thinking about what's happened over the last 10 years. Yeah, we can't do a comprehensive, we can't do justice to that in one sitting. But, you know, one of the things we were talking about off air is just the idea of the theory to action pipeline. And I think that defines a lot of people's journeys as things have really squeezed and gotten real over the last 10 years, as political instability has really bubbled to the surface, as the future, as the ground on which we find ourselves feels a little bit like quicksand sometimes. There's been this sense of having to move away from just pure theory toward we've got to get something done now. And it's that theory to action pipeline that I think is defining a lot of people's journeys over the last 10 years and increasingly going forward.
And I think before we get to the big picture, let's start personal. Where did you find yourself in around 2015, and what's been the journey up until now? I mean, I know personally a lot has changed in your thinking, in your approach to problem solving, and in your life, where you work and where you do most of your thinking and most of your doing, your action.
Yes.
Paint that picture for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am someone who loves ideas. I do like thinking about the world, and I think we must never forget to think about the world. We must, action actually finds its genesis in good ideas. And so I always like to say that the battle of ideas, the contestation of ideas is very necessary, but I'm just not sure that it's sufficient. I don't think it's sufficient. I think that if you continue to swirl around in theories and ideas, and you kind of spend your days thinking of how the world could or should be, and you don't test those ideas on the ground, you don't let those ideas touch reality and be sifted and tested by reality, you can have an intellectually stimulating kind of existence. But and I think that defines a lot of people when things were broadly stable. And I think what you found in the West, Ernst, certainly in Western kind of societies in general, but to some extent a global phenomenon. You had this, Francis Fukuyama famously spoke about the end of history. I like to think of it in Mark Stein's terms as a holiday from history. There was the 90s and the 2000s was arguably something like a holiday from history, where we sort of thought and pretended that everything was stable. In South Africa, there was the post-1994 kind of order, this supposedly wonderful constitution that was going to deliver the goods, and there was this sense of stability. Of course, if you looked really closely, you could see the earthquakes kind of beginning, and you could see this in the emerging culture wars in the West, in the places like the United States, the emerging problems that have now really manifested substantially in places like Europe. But by and large, it was a kind of stable. It felt like a stable order. But I think what we've discovered is that was really we were sort of seeing the end of the post-war kind of consensus, and that stability has given way to a very tumultuous 10 years. Older people who lived through the sort of revolutionary 60s suggest that what we've lived through just in the last few years puts that kind of to shame in terms of the sort of revolutionary ideas that have bubbled to the surface really over a few decades, but manifested in the last 10 years. So I think my journey has been coming from that place of stability where you can play with ideas in a sort of stable sandpit, a safe sandpit, to coming more to a place of, well, you can have ideas all day long, but so what? So what if I have a good theory on how a country should be structured? Why would the politicians listen to me? Why would power structures just change because I wrote a clever article in the Business Day or in some publication or blog or something like that? So it's not to belittle thinking through good ideas, but it's to say that I think a lot of people have realized that unless you are engaging in something real, you're just kind of playing in a very theoretical kind of space. And why that's not acceptable to a lot of people is because of that quicksand, because of the order kind of unraveling, and they're seeing that those ideas don't have a lot of traction and that it takes way more than just another think tank or another kind of clever article. And the mapping of that on my life is that I, for several years, for quite a long time actually, was a macroeconomic consultant to particularly the fund management industry, professional investors. And
very abstract world.
Quite an abstract world, but also finds expression concretely in the sense that if you give bad advice to a fund manager, he's going to take investment strategy decisions partly based on your advice. And he's actually got real skin in the game. And so there was an element of kind of touching reality there, no question about it. And I had to perform year in and year out for very, very top quality thinkers and fund managers. And that was a good and challenging space to be. But what I found myself doing so much was really kind of looking at the world looking through the window, into this thing called the world and the economy, and commenting on it, analyzing it. And that's a useful exercise. But after several years of basically telling the same story of decline and decay, it started to get quite tiring, perhaps even a little bit depressing and a bit demoralizing. Although I'm not someone who succumbs so much to that. If I see it like it is, and I'm really interested in the truth. But for me, the move across to Sakeliga in 2021, which is a public interest organization, a public interest litigant against harmful state policies, an organization that seeks to create alternative governance structures to where the state is failing, plays in a similar space in the same sort of world as AfriForum, where we are trying to solve real things concretely. And that's just been a real wonderful shift for me, opening up a whole new world of kind of intellectual possibilities, and also a huge lesson for me on this journey is that you can have all the great theoretical ideas in the world, but applying them into real political economy, applying them into real societies with real people who don't react or behave like the theory suggested they should or could. That's a really important space to be, because ultimately that's where reality resides.
And I think also something that stands out from the past 10 or so years is the rise of many crises, as you said, bubbling to the surface. Now, they might not have originated in the past decade, but they became increasingly apparent in the past decade, and especially in the Western world. Now, it's not an exhaustive list, but you can go down the bullet points: a demographic crisis, economic stagnation, social crises in regards to just simple questions of identity. I mean, people are scared to even answer the question, who are we? A lot of crises around meaning, especially on an individual level, especially with young men not knowing where to find meaning in life. What is the point of life? What should I be striving towards? The list goes on and on and on. But in in that environment, also when these crises come to the fore, also comes opportunity to provide answers to these problems. And we've seen a myriad of answers coming from all different angles. You see the rise of, for example, thinkers like Jordan Peterson, who particularly focuses on trying to provide an answer to the meaning crisis. You see the rise of many left-wing ideas, radical left-wing ideas, trying to say, well, here's the answer to the economic crisis. You see many right-wing ideas rise trying to answer the demographic or the immigration crisis. You see a lot of, just from all angles, you see, for example, crypto rising to answer some of the financial problems that we're seeing. Again, the opportunity presents itself, and we find ourselves within that milieu, within that environment of there's a desperation, a thirst for answers, because we see the problems around us. The holiday from history is ending, and now we have to go back to work, go back into the salt mines of history. And that demands answers, real answers, not just, as you said, battle of ideas where you have the luxury of gladiatorial combat between this idea, and you watch the debate, and then one idea wins the debate, and then you move on to the next debate between whatever ideas. Now people are actually wanting some real concrete solutions to the problems that they face. And that's a very Darwinian environment for ideas. You either produce the goods or produce the outcomes, or you perish. It's not just the fact of having the best argument. You actually have to be stress tested in reality. It's like I think we've chatted about this in a previous conversation as well. It's like the example of starting a business. You can think about the perfect business for decades, creating the image in your mind, but at some point you have to start the business. You can't wait for the perfect time, and it's going to be challenging.
Exactly. I love how you've kind of broadly summarized that. I just thinking about this conversation this morning, a little phrase popped into my head. The rise of the man of action, the rise of the woman of action. People who don't act unthinkingly. I think we've discussed this before. There's the purely theoretical man, and then there's the purely kind of reactive man who's not actually. What we cannot get away from is that you must have a framework. That framework should be flexible enough that you can learn, and it should be rigid enough that there's a sense of consistency, and kind of the point of a framework is that it's something that can't just be too fluid. And we have to interpret the world through particular frameworks. And I think the problem of ideology as such is the imposition onto reality of a very rigid, excessively rigid kind of theoretical framework that doesn't permit much room for learning and for kind of shaping things as you learn and as you go through life. So that's the overly theoretical, overly ideological view of the world, and a lot of the debates kind of get stuck in this space, and then people throw bombs across the ideological boundaries at each other, intellectual bombs.
One person writes a paper, someone else writes a rebuttal, and then he responds.
And again, I don't want to be sort of trashing or undermining or belittling the world of ideas.
It's not anti-intellectual standpoint.
Absolutely mustn't be. And in fact, that's precisely the problem of when the pendulum swings the other way. You get an anti-intellectualism, and you get unstructured action that is pursued without any particular framework. And you meet people like this, and they will have a completely different view from one week to the next about how you tackle X, Y, or Z in society. And although we need to face reality as it hits us, and so we must be flexible on that, you can get a completely unstructured action over here.
You're just swinging your club at the problem, and it's
totally. And that actually is where you get very frustrated action. That's usually the kind of action that manifests in riots or just general kind of shouting and protesting, and not a lot of kind of structure.
No, we saw that actually. The perfect example was the riots that we saw in the UK earlier this year against mass immigration, a real problem that is affecting their society. But
Yes.
all those dust bins or garbage bins that they set alight, all those cars they tipped over, all the shop windows that they broke, in the moment it's cathartic, but now that we can look back retrospectively, did anything change? When the dust settled, there was nothing standing.
All you've done is register your dissent. There's some value in that. But exactly, I think that was actually such a good example of a society in general, or a portion of society in general that sees a problem, experiences it viscerally, has been seeing it building up for several decades, and yet have not spent the time and the capital and the institutional effort to build mechanisms to really start tackling this, either politically, either in reality, on the ground, but mostly, you want to now flex your muscles on this issue, and the best you've got is walking in the streets and shouting. You haven't built any institution that can lobby or advocate or actually build up genuine power, maybe get large funding through which you can influence the political sphere, or whatever that might be. So they, unfortunately, in that case, by and large, are 3 decades behind. And as guys like to always say, the best time to do this was 30 years ago. The second best time is now. But you're seeing as these crises emerge and how weak some of these responses are, they haven't actually spent the time with the ideas and then converted that into structured action. And so that is a really good example. And unfortunately, the people who are in that position are losing and will continue to lose as long as they remain in that position of unstructured action or pure theory. There has to be this really powerful kind of synthesis of these two things. And also it has to be in collective action. So this idea of the individual acts, and it's just the individual level of analysis, this very liberal idea. Of course, so much of life is, yes, it's an individual action. I'm going to leave the studio today and individually do what I plan to do today without your consent. But of course, so much of what we're talking about is coordinated action, and action that happens in a kind of common space, in a public sphere. And we just do have an atomized modern society that sits online, sits in theoretical discussions. Most of the things they do individually. And the minute they encounter, we've discussed this before as well, the minute they encounter a kind of organized force, they think it's utterly overwhelming, because it, compared to what they've been able to achieve as an individual, typing on the internet, these organizations, they might be NGOs, they might be left-wing NGOs that are well-funded, they have a strategy, they have a professional executive that gets paid, and so they live out a strategy, they execute it on a strategy. It's not a strategy we might agree with, but they win, and that's what's been going on. So I think what our organizations are showing here in South Africa, and there are other groups doing this, around the world increasingly, is, get organized, merge good ideas with proper structure, and then act deliberately with a clear strategy. And you're not going to see those wins in the first month or maybe even 6 months. It's taken, AfriForum's about 20 years old, thereabouts.
Oh.
And I mean, AfriForum's been winning for a long time, but it takes that long. It takes a decade to 2 decades to build up that sense of momentum. And Sakeliga was founded in 2011, and it takes 5, 10, 15 years, and you really start.
That's where you got to start
getting
today.
that sense of momentum. You got to start. The sooner you start, the better.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I mean, that's just a final point there on the action versus the ideas. Afrikaner philosopher MP van Wyk Louw talked about or wrote about the idolatry of the act, where people just start arguing about, well, at least they're doing something. Well, that something can be very stupid or destructive. You can't just say because someone is taking action, then that's a good thing. But at the same time, as we said with the riots now, the other side of the coin is just writing the 10th or 20th opinion piece, just criticizing the mass immigration or pointing out the problems that come with it. That's also not going to solve the problem. You need to, as my father says, think and take action. But before you act, you need to think. So you need to have a clear strategy.
I just want to quickly pause on that. I think the world of think tanks has become a difficult world. I think 50, 60, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, think tanks were providing ideas into a very stable political order where there was kind of quite genuine and good faith debate, let's say in the House of Commons or in the Congress or in the parliaments. And the think tanks were equipping these politicians to make a better policy or to argue their case or what have you. It's not that there's no space for that anymore. In fact, politicians do need good ideas, and they often have very bad ideas. But it's very difficult for think tanks to find their place in this world because it's a world of great turmoil. It's a world of where action is required. And I think a lot of the think tanks are producing ideas or regurgitating ideas or distributing ideas, depending on the quality of the think tank. But power structures are not necessarily absorbing those ideas. Or to the extent that they absorb them, only absorb them for the purposes of executing power or for justifying the exercise of power. And so it's been I think it's a difficult space for think tanks. I think there is a place for that kind of work, but it needs to find a zone of analysis and perhaps partners that are building structured, that are interested in structured action, and kind of fitting their ideas into that and therefore supporting something that's very real. If you just do the op-eds, if you're just putting out another piece, I'm not sure that's interesting, and I'm not sure that there's much traction there. And I'd like to see more of that kind of slightly more entrepreneurial kind of progress in the think tank space to connect with people with agency.
I think one of the ways to describe the past 10 years, especially in South Africa, maybe to a lesser extent the Western world, it has been a mass extinction event of ideas that can't make that leap between the realm of ideas and reality. And it's been a reaffirming of that old saying of perfect is the enemy of the good. But I think I can add to that by saying perfect is also the enemy of the real. You can't just be theory smithing until you've created the perfect theory, and then because you're not going to be able to do that.
Totally.
So I think one of the things that's really come to the fore is also the idea that we can't just rewind. So you've talked about now history kind of going on holiday, but you also can't go back to the 90s. You can't go back to the 80s. You can't say, well, everything worked perfectly 10, 30 or 40 years ago. We just need to rewind back there. I'm convinced we actually find ourselves in a time now where the demand is we need fresh, new ideas, a new approach. We can't just rewind the clock to where we are nostalgic for.
Well, if you rewind the clock to the 80s, then in 20 years you get to where we got to.
Right.
20,
Well, then you're pretty much locking yourself into that fate.
No,
because nothing changed.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that you touched on it earlier as well, and I think kind of what you're getting at, and I totally believe this, is that these challenges that we're facing, this kind of quicksand that we felt like we're on culturally, societally, economically, and so on, it does purge away poor ideas, weak structures, excessively comfortable modes of living, even to some extent. And it sharpens our minds, our resolve, our characters, our beliefs, our faith. It forces us to dig deeper. And if you think of, if you accept this idea that in many respects the journey is more, or at least as important as the destination, it's actually a really rewarding journey to be on this. A lot of the pathologies that bubble to the surface in certain cultures, I mean, this doesn't apply to the whole world because a lot of the world was in poverty in the 70s and 80s and 90s, but a lot of the West had become decadent. It is decadent. It still is in many respects, but that decadence breeds this kind of complacence and to some extent laziness, and a view.
And ideas like this is the end now. This is the end of
this
history.
Is the end.
We've reached the pinnacle now.
But there's a kind of now what question there. Okay, so we're sitting in our plush couch watching any channel we could possibly think of, and we've got all the food we need in the fridge. And
it's around that time where you get films and books like Fight Club as well that are specifically about just
because
getting saturated in that consumerism.
Exactly,
of got to have that IKEA couch, and
it breeds nihilism.
Yeah,
it absolutely breeds nihilism, and so we're now, 20 to 30 years now into a different kind of cycle. Some people call it the fourth turning if you take the view of this kind of these cycles of history, or you could just think of it as the coming to the end of the post-war consensus or the dominant Anglo-European order, the Western, the dominant Western order. Something is ending. Something is ending and a new thing is beginning. And if we looking too much in the rearview mirror, certainly if we're looking in the recent rearview mirror, we're not going to get a lot of answers. If we want answers from history, I think we have to go far back and look at several thousand years of history and find times where people have dug trenches, have tackled difficult mountains with structured action. And something that I've just had to realize over these last few years, much of what I'm doing in my life, what we're doing, much of this phase that we're living through, I'm not necessarily likely to see the full fruits of our efforts,
But that's never stopped men in the past.
Well, exactly. And when I was younger, you have a very short time horizon for things. You sort of think, well, I'm going to do something and then there's going to be a result and we're going to have perfect free market economy and everything's going to be amazing and prosperous by the time I'm 45, And then you realize, actually, maybe if I'm lucky in my lifetime, I can achieve something that can be built on meaningfully by, another generation. And you know what? That's actually, if you just come to love the journey rather than be obsessed with the destination, because on that journey it's a journey of refining character development, deepening of one's faith, building fantastic relationships, and what else is life about, really? So just taking those steps, and maybe only 2, 3, 4 generations down the line, there's going to be the kind of full fruition of that, hopefully, success. I mean, nothing's guaranteed. Maybe we fail, but there's there's that biblical injunction to be faithful in your generation. You can't figure everything out. I don't know what scenarios are going to play out. It's a world of rapid demographic, political, ideological change. There's lots of changes going on, and you get guys, sort of futurists, who are constantly trying to game out where this is going. And we must think intelligently about the future, but just be faithful in your generation. Do what's in your hand. Use what's in your hand to do what you can. Do it in a structured way. That's I think the key thing, is not this cult of action. Doing structured things. And if you don't know how to do structured things, it actually is better to probably do nothing, because a lot of action can be very, very damaging.
Well, that's the saying of it's better to do nothing than to do something stupid.
Yeah. So ideas are safe. They're cheap. They're low risk on the whole. They're important for fueling action, which is hard. It's expensive and it's high risk. But to do higher risk things, sensibly higher risk things, properly thought through higher risk things, where there is the chance of failure. If you're just in the realm of theory, there's no real chance of failure. You're just because it's not being applied, and that's partly why you get these socialist theorists who keep saying, well, okay, yes, it did fail there, but my ideas weren't really tried in that instance. They actually can't face that failure, and so they live in this world of never being able to be falsified, and it's just not a interesting and rewarding kind of space to be in. So yeah, the realm of action is where it's hard, but there's a principle that we've known for thousands of years, and that is that hard things are more rewarding. Hard things are far more fulfilling.
That's why we went to the moon.
Far more fulfilling than easy things. Yeah.
And I mean, that's also, I think, now looking forward, we've looked a lot, we focused now a lot on the rear view mirror. And I think looking forward, you've now talked about the massive opportunities that are out there. And to sum it up, I think the opportunity, the air of opportunity around us, it's the crown is in the gutter and it's there to be picked up, but the only person that can really pick up that crown, who's going to be able to assume a position of leadership in their community, in their society, are the people that have a fresh idea that's actually going to be able to deliver the goods. You can't just say, well, make me your leader because I've written 20 very, very prestigious essays on solving the problem. No, the first person that comes and says, well, I actually have a track record of at least partially solving the problem, that person is going to blow the think tank or the essayist out of the water.
Absolutely.
And that's the opportunity.
100%. And as I said, the rise of the man of action, that's what we're seeing again.
And I would add the man of results.
Yeah, well, exactly. The man of structured action.
Right.
Good example on this. You had theorists for decades talking about how bad the monetary system was and how we needed sound money and so on. They basically made no dent on the power structures. Bitcoin got invented in 2009 by a practitioner, by someone who said, I'm going to build the apparatus of sound money. I'm not going to advocate for it. I'm not going to ask someone else to build it. Now, let's see where this goes. I'm not saying this has now solved everything, but it's a great example. And the building of the Bitcoin architecture has done way more for helping people understand the problem of our monetary system.
And disrupting
the order than a million opinion pieces that were written, in the decades prior to that. So, but now, possibly those opinion pieces in the decades prior to that inspired the guy to build Bitcoin. Hence, ideas are necessary, but they're not sufficient. So that's a great example. Another, you see men of action right now. Elon Musk is a man of action. There's lots to criticize him about. There's lots to be fascinated by with what he's doing.
I mean, the action of buying Twitter, for example, which I think that has not had a negligible effect on.
He bought a platform. He wanted free speech, so instead of moaning about it, he went and bought the platform.
He could have just continued tweeting on X or then Twitter about how bad the platform is and how free speech is not being.
And Donald Trump is another example of a man of action, and there's many you can point to. And what's interesting is that it's quite fascinating. You see the ideologues, the guys who live in the pure world of kind of theoretical purity.
The comment class.
Well, Donald Trump, he's not good on this thing, and Musk is like bad on that thing, and this and that thing. Now, fact is that their actions are making a massive difference. Now, we still have to watch as things unfold. I'm not saying this is just going in an unequivocally great direction, but you could well see that an Elon Musk and a Donald Trump and what's emerging in America does more for liberty in the genuine sense than all the think tanks, the liberal think tanks, and even a guy like Ron Paul, who was a fantastic politician, had a whole lot of great ideas, but was never able to action them. You get an imperfect.
But now he's actually being empowered by the men of action.
Now he's being empowered by the men of action, and his ideas can get absorbed into that space. But it often takes an imperfect, a theoretically impure, very man of action, as long as he's got kind of the right the right instincts, as long as he's operating from some framework. Now, Donald Trump, he can go off in lots of different directions on stuff, but there's some framework there, and there's concerted action, and it's risky. You get slandered, you get vilified. It's hard. You get shot at.
You're going to fail many times.
You're going to fail.
You can just look at the many times SpaceX has had explosions and
but
equipment fail.
It's that man in the arena thing.
But now, just a few months ago or a few weeks ago, Musk did something that's never been done, that catch a rocket.
Yeah.
But I mean, you can just look at all the compilations of all the rockets that have exploded before then.
Yeah.
And he's in the public eye. It must be quite stressful and under pressure. Everyone's watching.
And you know what this does? Structured, brave, successful action, it inspires. It really inspires.
That's why people like the examples you've mentioned, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and more, attract so much attention, but also so much admiration, and people that genuinely are looking towards them for inspiration.
Saw a dad holding his little boy, watching the rocket catching thing.
Fantastic.
And this was a little 7-year-old boy or something, and he was kind of fist pumping, and he's got a hero. He's inspired. It's about endeavor. I'm not convinced that we need to go to Mars, but I don't have to worry about it. Musk is funding it, and if he wants to...
But we should strive to go to Mars.
Whether
that should be the point of your striving is another conversation.
We should strive.
We should be striving.
Exactly that. I think that sense of endeavor, that sense of exploration. I mean, I don't even have it as much. No. I mean, a guy like Musk has it on steroids. He has this intrepid kind of exploration spirit, and it's that kind of person that we need to be unleashing and empowering. And instead, we've been empowering bureaucrats and academics and the management class and the kind of the risk managers rather than the risk takers, the risk managers. And I think that pendulum is starting to swing. I hope it's starting to swing. We have a world, not just the Western world, but it is quite a chronic Western problem at the moment. Absolutely mired in bureaucracy and red tape and compliance and everything else. But I'm hopeful that we're moving into a place of action. But the crucible through which you have to go from this stifling bureaucratic system to a more intrepid exploration system, I think is a crucible of instability. And that brings us back to this idea of opportunity. Instability necessarily does create opportunity because there's gaps, there's new things emerging. States that ordinarily controlled so many spheres of life are receding. They're unable to do so. The bureaucracies are getting too bloated and they're failing. And so there's these increasing pockets of where non-state solutions, community solutions, business solutions can move into, so a whole substantial world of opportunity is opening up as this post-war consensus starts kind of corroding or is corroding. It's not the end of history; it's the end of the holiday from history. And we can't hark back to the holiday. We've got to look forward to this time of instability, and it's going to be a character type that succeeds. And why I say character, perhaps, and not personality type. Maybe the distinction there is personality might be something a little bit more innate, genetic disposition of how you are. But character can be trained and formed and cultivated. And I think people need to be cultivating that character of bravery and of action and of risk-taking in an uncertain world. Because the alternative is to feel these shifting sands and kind of cower up into the corner and not want to be able to face it. And there's a lot of people doing that. And I think that they are going to be the losers and the unsuccessful, and they're going to have a very, very difficult lives in this next kind of phase that I feel like we're moving into. So it's people with that character for kind of faithful focused, strategic action, willingness to put ideas into practice, to fail, to learn from those failures, to stand up straight again and kind of move forward. That for me feels like the type of posture that we need to be having. We've lived through these 10 years of great shifting sands. I don't think it's over. I think there's more to come, and it's not all going to be in one direction into the good, riding off into the sunset. There's a lot of difficulty still ahead, and facing it with cultivating the right character to face that, I think, is where a lot of success will lie.
And I think a conversation that's revolved now around taking risks, striving, actually trying something, even if you fail. I want to end that or conclude that conversation with an open challenge, and that is actually, we've talked about the need to dig trenches, but I think there's also a need to find a mountain and to climb it. What are some of the mountains and challenges that you think are still out there, almost as a challenge to the audience, that you think still need proper answers? Maybe we don't even have the answers for them yet. What are some of those challenges that you see out there that still require strivers and people to strive towards an answer? It can be brief.
Sure. Yeah, that's a tough one, Ernst. You've put me on the spot there a little bit. I just think that I think one of the things, this just comes into my mind, maybe it's where my frame of reference is right now. I think that a big feature of the next several years and perhaps even decades is an ongoing inability of large and complex systems to stay stable. And so I think this maybe is still a little bit abstract. We can delve into maybe one or two examples, but when you come from a world where the state, on the whole, the therapeutic modern state kind of makes everything comfortable and nice. It sort of keeps you safe. It makes sure you don't fall off the bus. It makes sure everyone's safe, and it kind of is this big brother that does everything.
This big padded room.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the padding's falling off that room, and the room's shaking, and cracks are starting to appear. And so again, I think in the similar vein, I think that's going to present a lot of mountains. First big mountain is in the abstract is that sense of insecurity. So humans do love security. We all do a lot of things in our lives to have a sense of security, and that's natural. That's a human trait, and that's part of why we strive. We strive against the chaos that this planet throws at us from a weather perspective or from just an entropy perspective. But there is the kind of endeavor that tames that chaos, and there's the kind of endeavor that slinks into a corner and tries to risk manage this little bit that you have that feels safe now. So I think one of the things is, if we could get, so now we can make it slightly more practical. Imagine a realm, imagine a part of society, imagine an area of, it could be the economy or society or whatever it is, that the state is currently in charge of or does. And now imagine that the state does not do that thing anymore. What are you going to do about that?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. Is that just going to become now a pocket of vacated order where chaos can flow into that? Or are you going to join forces with like-minded people and increasingly move into those spaces and create new kinds of order and better kinds of order in those spaces? When the state vacates areas, there's necessarily a vacuum. Vacuums don't automatically get filled by good guys creating order. They can get filled by gangsters creating chaos. That is just how the world is. So I think a big mountain, you can even think it in South African terms, crime, safety, security, massive, massive mountain to climb as an individual person and as acting as a kind of in a collective way or with a group. solving the problems of insecurity, lack of security, lack of safety, combating. So this would be maybe a message to business people, pooling resources to combat organized crime, mafia type business practices.
We have a mafia for almost every sector in South Africa. We've got a construction mafia, water mafia.
Exactly. And there are other mafias all over the world. South African mafias are, in some respects less sophisticated, in others more violent and vicious. It's a difficult space. Who is going to tackle that? Who's going to stand up to that? That is a serious mountain. That is a tough mountain to climb. So I think one of the things is, men and women who's going to put up their hand to do the really hard stuff. And the hard stuff is not just that you have to work long hours or, do some backbreaking work or expend a lot of effort. The hard stuff is when you get opposition that's vicious. Because when you're over the target, when you get into these spaces that need order, that need structured action, you're going to encounter some vicious opposition. Sometimes it will be verbal, and sometimes that will spill over into physical violence, and you might become
extortion,
and you might become less safe. Donald Trump is standing up to be president of America, and someone tried to shoot his head off.
Twice.
Yeah. And it's not a nice thought, but it's that sort of, you're really making a difference. There's this old adage, if no one's angry with you, you're probably just not making much of a difference in the world.
When you're taking flack, you're over the target.
You're over the target. So there's the right kind of flack, and there's bad kind of flack. But we know what we're talking about. As you get into these zones, you're going to disrupt nests of corruption, nests of laziness, places that have been festering in a dysfunctional way.
Enemy trenches, basically.
When you go in and clean up and you bring order to a place, the people who benefit from chaos, they're going to fight you. So I think it's a time for steeling oneself. This is a tough thing to have to grasp, and we can't just click our fingers and become brave people who are willing to go in the line of fire. We need to train ourselves in that direction and cultivate the kind of character that can cope with that in 5 or 10 years from now, even if that's not you today. So it's cultivating that character of steel that can actually handle what's coming, because the contestation is in some ways only just beginning.
And that's a very thorough, off-the-cuff answer there. I think that's a good place to start. There's not a lot that I can add there, just maybe briefly. I think the other challenge that's lying ahead is, I think the sobering realization that you need to be creating alternate centers of power to challenge this power centers that already exist has sunken in quite deep. But I think the challenge is still, so we know how alternate power centers should look like, but now we need to start actually creating those alternate power centers.
And it takes resource, it takes time, it takes submission to hierarchies. So that's a challenge for some people. They live very atomistic lives where they're not particularly submitted anywhere into some kind of a structure, and they're going to really struggle to engage in effective action, completely outside of those sorts of structures. So it's kind of a submission to not only those structures, but the need to apply more resource to areas that historically have seemed a bit boring. Like, we're building an institution, I'd rather go on holiday, But if I go on holiday all the time and ignore building these institutions, I'm going to wake up in 10, 20 years from now and everything's going to be gone, because we've let other structured power take over and control those things. So I think that is so important.
And that's, in the end, that's how creating alternate power structures work. We use the metaphor of digging trenches, but my friend Oren McIntyre also uses the the metaphor of capturing castles. You don't always have to create something from nothing. There's a lot of institutions and power centers out there that are there for the capturing or for the steering in the right direction. Go to the boring parent teacher meeting. Go to the get involved in your school, get involved in your church, get involved in the community organizations that you find around you. That's what our enemies have been doing for decades now. They've been going to the boring meetings. They've been sitting through the administrative sludge and the administrative swamp to get to the end where they start voting on things and policy decisions are made, because they know if they can get through the drudgery, they're going to be rewarded with administrative rewards. So when it comes to what we need to be doing, well, you should be digging trenches, but you should also be trying to capture castles. And I think that's the challenge that still lies ahead. And yeah, Russell, thank you very much for the retrospective, but then also the future orientated, because that's, I think you one of your colleagues, Gerard van Onselen, used the metaphor of the train that's been derailed, and we talked about that on a previous episode where we've 3D modeled the derailed train. We've made the diagrams. We've created the 3D like reenactment of how the train is derailed. But at some point, it needs to be either put back on the tracks or even a new track needs to be constructed.
Exactly.
That's where we find ourselves.
Exactly,
now.
And for many things, it's a new track that has to be constructed because the old track is so corrupted and so broken and so
it's just going to
messed up.
derail again.
And in some ways, that's actually not just a metaphor, that's actually what goes on in South Africa.
Right. And increasingly in America.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. This has been a great conversation. Love these kinds of, just framing these kinds of topics in this way. We don't have all the answers, but we're just trying to kind of sift through this complexity and think about some sort of structured framework for action. And hopefully people can take some of those abstract sort of concepts about what we've been saying and see how that might apply to their own very specific situation. People live in such different parts of the world where the challenges are all quite different.
Some solutions you can't copy and paste.
Exactly.
You can be inspired
exactly. by them. But some frameworks are useful for applying these sorts of different ideas. So I really appreciate the chat.
And then the easiest question is, where can people find your work, or where can people find out more about what you're doing?
Thanks, Adam. I would just encourage people to go to Sakeliga's website, sakeliga.org.za. We are engaging in a lot of high-level public interest litigation to push the state back, to resist harmful state action, resist harmful state regulation, create space for businesses to move into areas and create solutions, to create alternative governance structures, alternative centers of power, where healthier, stronger governance can be deployed into a sphere, so that you get to what end? To the end of order and flourishing, and a kind of constructive way of being, a way of living, rather than the chaos that we've become kind of so numb to and almost resigned ourselves to. So that's what we do at Sakeliga. It's very rewarding. There's a lot going on as we move into the next year. Under this new government in South Africa, there's been a raft of harmful legislation signed on top of the previous 30 years of harmful legislation. So there's a lot of resistance of that going on from a litigation perspective. And we're energized by what we've been able to achieve so far. And we're really energized by the support that we're getting from responsible business people, a business community that's starting to really realize that it's up to them to build the kind of structures of freedom and order that we've been advocating for so long. Now it's time to build.
So in conclusion, what you're saying is there's a lot of work still to be done.
Tons of work still to be done.
Well, that's a great place to be. And thank you very much for you also tuning in. And if you want to share some of your thoughts and questions, leave them in the comment section. I read all of them, really appreciate it as well. And then also, if you like these types of conversations, you can subscribe and look forward to what lies ahead in 2025, because this is now the last Stream of Consciousness episode for 2024. I hope you really enjoyed this year's lineup of guests and topics, and I look forward to bringing you more episodes in the year ahead. So I hope you all have a fantastic holiday season ahead, and also a Merry Christmas to everyone out there, and I will see you in the new year. Cheers, guys. Have a good one, and God bless.